By now, many of you are aware, but just in case, my husband has accepted a job offer that is relocating our family this month to Vancouver, British Columbia. And I greatly anticipate reuniting with my husband soon and letting our new life begin. So as I begin my sermon this morning, I first want to acknowledge that there are several among us this morning who have left their own places of worship to be here at First Church. And I want to acknowledge their friendship and support over the past 10 years in my time in Dallas, and for what you have meant and the fact that you are here today. Thank you for shaping me. I also want to take a brief personal moment to share with this congregation that although my tenure here will only be a blip on your long radar, I do hope that you can make it till the end of August before you say, "Now what was that associate's name again?" This church will be huge in my heart, and know that when the day comes that people speak about my legacy and ministry, this church will be lifted high. For you see, it was at this altar rail in 2002 where I was ordained. And so before even coming to this congregation, this place holds great memories for me. But personally, this is where my first baby boy son was born, and here at this altar rail was baptized. You see, I took seriously that whole idea of first kids. And professionally, it has been a joy and a delight to work with you as a congregation as we seek to answer the vital question of how does a traditional mainline church engage young adults in a new and different way for the survival of the church and the spiritual growth of the young adults involved. It has been and will always be a challenging question to answer, and to make sure that the answers that come up are different from the answers that have come forward in the past, because certainly denomination-wide it has shown that after 32 years we still have not figured out the question of how to bring young adults into the life of the church. Now, as people across the conference have asked me what ingredients are necessary to create a successful outcome for a young adult ministry, I have first said it takes an existing congregation who is not afraid of its future and is also willing to embrace something new. In other words, this church, you became aware of your own fear of change so that you could keep that fear in check to allow something new to unfold. And it's the awareness of the fears that bind us. It's not necessarily getting rid of those fears, but it's the awareness of the fears that bind us, the fears that keep our ties from binding us closer together. It is this fear that is the focus of my sermon today. I've shared with you before the mantra of a friend and former church member who died in her late 30s from leukemia. She would often say, as she laid in the hospital bed with a terminal illness, "Health is a halo worn by the unaware." It's almost a prophetic mantra, more of a warning to us who were there to visit her than it was of any kind of encouragement to her in her final days. And I was reminded of this mantra this past week when I heard of a dear friend who is my age with 2 young kids who was diagnosed with cancer. She found a lump in her breast last Monday. By the end of Tuesday, she was told to expect it to be malignant. And this week, she will face not only having a double mastectomy, but a hysterectomy. It is in times like these, when we hear of our friends who receive these diagnoses out of the blue, that take our breath away, that we think, what is our Christian response? And somewhere there's an automatic Christian response within each of us that, we silently shake our heads and we ache inside for our friends, and all we can muster to say back to them is, "I will pray for you." And then as Christians, we place them on our church's prayer list, and we email our most powerful prayer warriors we have in our lives, and we have concern for them, and we do what we can for them, or all that we think we can do. We make a casserole for them. We send a card to them. We sit in the chemotherapy waiting room with them while they receive treatment. And as Christians, this is all that we think we can do. Certainly, we are not the doctors or the oncologists. And certainly, we are mainline Protestants who don't want to say anything to our friends to insinuate or imply that our God can or cannot heal in this situation. All we Christians think we can do is make a casserole, send a card, or maybe sit in a waiting room. And I want to suggest to you today that there is something more that we Christians can do. And to find this something more, I want us to locate ourselves deeply, rootedly in the Gospel of John. You see, Jesus has just performed another very public miracle, turning some loaves of bread and some fish into enough to feed a crowd of 5,000, not counting women and children to be exact. A challenge that probably any good restaurateur would probably take on, maybe. And having fed the crowd, he and his disciples moved on towards the other side of the lake. The disciples went ahead of him, and again, Jesus performs another miracle, this one quite intimate with the disciples. He walks on water. And now here on the other side of the lake, the 5,000 that he left behind have followed him. And why wouldn't they? It wasn't as if he had a neon sign flashing over his head that said, "This is God's Son, and if you work on your head knowledge and sit in a pew once a week for the rest of your life, you will end up in heaven if you follow him." That's not why they crossed the lake. You see, they followed him because they were poor peasants, existing in the midst of a social context far distant and far remote from our perceived middle-class reality. They lived in a world where you had money or you didn't. And the percent that had money was probably 1 to 3% in the entire empire, leaving 97% without it. And when you didn't have money, you fell into debt to those who did. And the kind of debt that you fell into wasn't in the form of a credit card bill that allowed you to maintain the airs that you have money like we do today. It was in the form of hard labor, hard living. Lives lived in the context of an unstable Roman government constantly seeking to tighten its military and political control, constantly finding new and unique ways to siphon off more resources from the working poor in order to maintain their elite status quo. The 5,000 have followed him because they have very little. And here this man comes who offers a free meal. He gives them a miracle, and they follow.